Ukrainian drones continue targeting some of the most vulnerable parts of Russia's military, industrial infrastructure, and economic network. Overnight, reports emerged of another drone strike inside Russia's Stavropol region, this time hitting the Nevinnomyssk Azot chemical plant. Following the attack, a fire reportedly broke out at a large-scale ammonia production facility. Local footage from the scene appeared to show little or no effective air defense response during the strike, raising more questions about Russia's ability to protect critical industrial sites deep inside its territory. Residents near the facility described the situation as severe, and the target itself is strategically important. Nevinnomyssk Azot is not just a fertilizer plant, it is one of Russia's largest chemical production complexes. The facility produces massive quantities of ammonia, ammonium nitrate, carbamide, and other chemical products essential to both agriculture and industry. While these chemicals are widely used for civilian purposes, some of them are also critical components in the production chains for explosives and ammunition. That means facilities like this indirectly support Russia's broader military-industrial system. In addition, fertilizer exports remain a significant revenue source for the Russian economy, with Russia accounting for a major share of global ammonium nitrate production.
From a strategic perspective, strikes like this create pressure on multiple fronts at once: industrial output, military supply chains, export revenue, and agricultural production. Meanwhile, tensions involving Belarus are also beginning to rise sharply. The commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, known by the call sign Magyar, issued a direct warning toward Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko. In his statement, he claimed Ukraine tracks every Shahed drone crossing Belarusian territory into Ukraine, and accused Minsk of becoming increasingly involved in the conflict by allowing Russian drone operations to use Belarusian airspace and territory. The message carried a clear warning. Continued cooperation with Russian drone operations could eventually bring consequences for Belarus itself. This comes shortly after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also warned about potential increased military activity involving Belarus. The growing rhetoric suggests Kyiv may be signaling that Belarus is moving closer from indirect support into more active participation in Russia's war effort. Military analysts have also pointed out Belarus's geographic vulnerability. Unlike Russia, Belarus has only a small number of major strategic energy facilities, and some of them are located very close to the Ukrainian border. For example, the Moser oil refinery sits less than 40 kilometers from Ukraine, making it significantly more exposed in the event of escalation.
Russia's position is becoming increasingly difficult as the war continues to place enormous pressure on both its economy and military resources. Analysts believe the Kremlin is now trying to use every available political and strategic tool to maintain momentum and project strength. Recent meetings and communications between Vladimir Putin and Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko have fueled speculation that Moscow may be seeking deeper cooperation from Belarus in support of its military objectives. At the same time, Ukrainian officials and military figures have issued increasingly direct warnings toward Minsk, signaling that any further escalation involving Belarus could carry serious consequences. Despite Russia's numerical advantages in manpower and military equipment, Ukraine continues demonstrating its ability to resist through asymmetric warfare, drone operations, and targeted strikes on critical infrastructure. The conflict increasingly highlights how modern warfare is being shaped not only by troop numbers, but also by technology, logistics, intelligence, and economic endurance.
Attention is also shifting toward growing tensions in the Asia-Pacific region, following recent comments from former U.S. President Donald Trump regarding Taiwan and China. Trump stated that the United States would defend Taiwan in the event of conflict with China, while simultaneously criticizing Taiwanese independence and urging Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturers to relocate production to the United States. Reports also suggested that certain weapons deliveries to Taiwan are currently paused. The statements have generated significant debate because they appear to weaken the long-standing U.S. strategy of strategic ambiguity toward Taiwan. For decades, Washington maintained a carefully balanced position, officially recognizing the One China policy while continuing military support for Taiwan and leaving uncertainty over whether the U.S. would directly intervene in a conflict. That ambiguity served as a deterrent, forcing Beijing to calculate the risks of military action without knowing how Washington would respond. Critics now argue that clearer public signals about non-intervention could shift the strategic balance in China's favor.
At the same time, Trump continues calling for reduced American dependence on China, while simultaneously encouraging deeper business engagement. His recent interactions with Chinese leadership, accompanied by major U.S. business figures, have raised questions among analysts about whether economic interests are beginning to outweigh long-term geopolitical strategy. From Beijing's perspective, the optics of these developments are significant. China can present the situation as evidence that economic leverage and trade relationships are becoming more influential than traditional alliance structures or military deterrence. However, this does not necessarily mean a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is imminent. A full-scale military operation against Taiwan would remain an extremely high-risk undertaking involving complex naval logistics, major economic consequences, possible international sanctions, and the potential involvement of regional powers such as Japan, along with political pressure from the United States Congress. Instead, many experts believe China is more likely to intensify gray zone tactics below the threshold of open war. These could include larger military exercises around Taiwan, cyber attacks, economic pressure, maritime intimidation, and diplomatic efforts designed to isolate Taipei internationally while avoiding direct large-scale conflict.
Putin is expected to visit China on May 19 and 20. A trip that comes at a time when global geopolitical alignments appear to be shifting rapidly. Some analysts argue that recent American political rhetoric has unintentionally pushed several traditional U.S. allies closer toward China as they search for alternative economic and strategic partnerships. Concerns have grown in Europe over discussions involving tariffs, possible troop reductions, and repeated criticism of NATO commitments. Critics warn that uncertainty surrounding long-term American policy could encourage allies to diversify their partnerships and strengthen ties with Beijing. An interesting detail also emerged from reports surrounding recent high-level visits to China. According to media accounts, members of the American delegation reportedly disposed of all gifts and items received from Chinese officials before boarding Air Force One. Pens, souvenirs, documents, and other materials were allegedly left behind as part of strict security protocols. Security measures reportedly extended even further. Delegation members were said to have avoided using personal electronic devices during the trip, relying instead on temporary clean phones. Some reports also claimed devices on board were stored in Faraday-protected containers designed to block electromagnetic signals and reduce the risk of surveillance or cyber intrusion.
Meanwhile, Russia continues trying to project the image of a global superpower despite mounting economic and military pressure. Many analysts argue that a significant portion of Russia's geopolitical influence still relies heavily on Soviet-era military infrastructure, particularly its nuclear arsenal inherited after the collapse of the Soviet Union. At the same time, Moscow is once again increasing attention on Transnistria, the breakaway region located between Moldova and Ukraine. Putin recently signed measures simplifying Russian citizenship procedures for residents there, shortly after Russia passed legislation allowing the military to defend Russian citizens abroad. Observers note that this strategy follows a familiar pattern seen in several previous conflicts. First, Russian passports are distributed to residents in disputed regions. Later, Moscow claims a responsibility to protect those citizens, which can then be used to justify political pressure, military presence, or intervention. Similar approaches were previously seen in regions such as Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and parts of eastern Ukraine before escalation occurred there. As a result, developments in Transnistria are being closely watched by both Moldova and Ukraine.
The region holds strategic importance because it sits near Ukraine's Odessa region and contains a significant Russian military presence alongside large ammunition depots. Although Russia lacks a direct land corridor to Transnistria, expanding Russian citizenship there creates future political leverage and propaganda narratives centered around the protection of Russian-speaking populations. Many residents of Transnistria already possess multiple passports, including Moldovan, Romanian, Ukrainian, and Russian documents. This means the foundation for future political claims already exists, even without immediate military escalation. The situation has also revived discussions about Cold War-era espionage and security operations. Reports about discarded gifts during diplomatic visits reminded some observers of one of the most famous Soviet intelligence operations in history, the hidden surveillance device concealed inside a wooden Great Seal of the United States. In 1945, Soviet schoolchildren from the Artek camp presented U.S. Ambassador Leon Theremin with a large carved wooden version of the Great Seal as a symbolic gesture of friendship following World War II. The ambassador later displayed the gift in his Moscow office, unaware that it secretly contained an advanced listening device hidden inside.
Hidden inside the wooden seal was an advanced Soviet listening device created by engineer Leon Theremin. The device, later nicknamed the Thing, was revolutionary for its time. It contained no batteries, no internal power source, and emitted no constant signal, allowing it to remain undetected for years. Soviet intelligence operators would direct a radio signal toward the U.S. Embassy from outside the building. A membrane inside the hidden device reacted to conversations in the room, subtly altering the reflected signal, which could then be intercepted and decoded remotely. Because the device stayed passive until activated externally, traditional surveillance detection methods failed to find it. The operation remained secret for 7 years until 1952, when a British radio operator accidentally intercepted embassy conversations during routine monitoring. Security officials were stunned by the sophistication of the technology, which was considered decades ahead of its time. The story becomes even more remarkable when looking at the life of Leon Theremin himself. Theremin was not only an engineer and intelligence asset, but also a celebrated inventor and musician. He created the theremin, one of the world's first electronic musical instruments, played without physical contact and admired by figures such as Albert Einstein and Charlie Chaplin. In 1927, the Soviet Union sent theremin to the United States to promote Soviet scientific achievement, though intelligence gathering was also reportedly part of his mission. He became well known in New York society and moved among wealthy and influential circles. However, his personal life later created controversy. After marrying a black ballerina during the 1930s, a highly controversial relationship in that era, his social and intelligence networks reportedly collapsed, angering Soviet authorities. In 1938, Theremin returned to the Soviet Union under circumstances that remain debated by historians. Some believe he returned voluntarily, while others argue he was forced back. Once inside the USSR, he was arrested and imprisoned on espionage charges, despite having worked on behalf of Soviet intelligence. Later, he was transferred to a secret NKVD research laboratory, sometimes referred to as a sharashka, where imprisoned scientists and engineers were forced to work on state projects. There, he worked alongside future Soviet aerospace legends and developed many of his most important inventions, including the famous hidden surveillance device. For decades afterward, Leon Theremin faded into obscurity. Many in the West even believed he had died. Only years later did international media reveal that he was still alive. Despite his extraordinary achievements, he never received lasting recognition or prosperity from the Soviet system he had served for most of his life. He died in Moscow in 1993 at the age of 97, largely forgotten and living in modest conditions. Today, Theremin is remembered as a brilliant but tragic figure, an inventor, intelligence operative, and scientific pioneer whose innovations helped shape both modern electronic music and Cold War espionage technology space.
As global tensions continue to rise from Eastern Europe to the Asia Pacific, the balance of power is shifting faster than many expected. The coming months could reshape not only regional conflicts, but the future of global alliances themselves. Stay informed, stay critical, and thank you for watching.